Welcome to Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast. Learn firsthand from business owners who built successful ABA businesses. Utilize proven techniques and strategies to help your practice thrive. This is Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast with Jonathan Mueller.
Will is the co-founder and co-CEO of Ascend Behavior Partners and Element RCM. He spent his entire career in healthcare, first as a medical device engineer, then in healthcare services, and for the last 7 years in autism. He's my business partner and an exceptionally smart, values-aligned, and strategic thinker. And he's my unofficial therapist. So Will, welcome to the pod.
Hey, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Jonathan.
First, before we get started, did I see some purple on your nails? I'm digging those nails.
Oh, dude, guilty is charged. Guilty is charged. So for all of the YouTube, people watching YouTube out there, I have a layer of purple with a glittery sparkle on top of it. I've got 2 daughters at home, a 6 and an 8-year-old, and one painted the left hand and one painted the right hand. And
nice, some daddy-daughter time. I love it.
Guilty. I love it. Right. Does your daughter paint your nails?
She does sometimes, it's fun. I try to roll with it. Nice work.
No, man.
Nice work. I'm impressed.
Thank you, Will. I'm super stoked for this conversation. And I want to start. Let's go back sort of before your autism services experience. But you worked at DaVita, and DaVita is a Fortune 500 kidney dialysis provider. And I'm really interested in what you learned at DaVita that translated to autism services.
Absolutely. You hear me talk about lessons that I learned and observations from that really well-run organization. For me, a lot goes back to my mentor when I first joined DaVita. She was a senior director of our region overseeing dialysis centers. Her name was Jan Sheets, and she was a very experienced nurse, and she had gone back to school to get her MBA and learn business terminology and operations. And she said on the very first day that I started at a center, if you care for your caregivers, they will care for your patients. And that has always stuck with me as an axiom in healthcare, that without your caregivers, your providers, you're really nothing. And so I know that when we started Ascend, one of our pillars was having our caregivers, our RBTs and BCBAs, at the forefront of our minds when it came to designing everything in the organization. Everything from policies to our systems to how we communicate, because that's really the most important thing, is that touch point from the RBT to the child, or that conversation from a BCBA to a parent. And so that's something that I really appreciated, and folks like Jan and many others at DaVita really embraced. Another thing too was culture. DaVita is known from the outside as having a quirky culture, but man, if it's for you, it's like home, and that's what it was for me. And even to this day, I can recite core values and other sayings that I didn't even intentionally work hard to learn or memorize. But after being in that environment and just seeing them spoken every day, seeing them visually, hearing them, it just became ingrained in me. So I thought that was really well done, and it doesn't happen by accident. It happens with intention, and I try to be a student with that every day here at Ascend and Element.
Yeah, I remember reading a case study about Kent Theory, DaVita's CEO, who, it was around early 2000s, I think, took over, and he had, as you described, it was an intention around the culture and how values were diffused throughout the culture and how they lived them. And it was like, no silver bullets here, as we know with culture, right? Mm-hmm. it's little things like they had expressions like all for one and one for all, and people, there was a call and a response, right? Where at the end of the initial training that everyone at DaVita went through, as I understand it, they would like literally walk across this bridge, and they'd accept the challenge, say, I'm choosing DaVita. I mean, it felt like those kinds of things that made it such a strong, cohesive culture.
Yeah, that's right. At the time when I joined, DaVita was growing between 50,000 and 60,000 employees nationwide. And the majority of the employees were the equivalent of registered behavior technicians. They were technicians that did the majority of the day-to-day patient care when patients came into dialysis centers to get their treatment. And so and they were overseen by renal nurses, nurses that specialized in working with dialysis patients, very much like our BCBAs oversee RBTs. And how do you make it so that each of those RBTs, whether they're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or in California or Florida, are delivering the same excellent level of care and service to patients? And how do you make it possible so that a center can feel the same way, whether you show up, in one in Washington State or one in Maine, and that's really where the magic of culture comes in. There's no substitution for culture when it comes to processes or dictating people how to act. The culture really resulted in the discretionary effort that people put into their day-to-day work. And I thought that was really special. And you're right, there's no shortcut. It took, by the time I joined, Ken Theory had been doing that for 10 years. And, as he would say, it still wasn't perfect, but we're not done yet. And I really appreciated that groundedness and that transparency.
I hear that expression from you all the time. We're not perfect, but we're not done yet. But this is the first time I've realized that came from Ken Theory. So Will, you've like pulled the veil back. Oh my gosh! All right, I'll give him credit going forward.
Absolutely.
One other thing you mentioned is interesting. Your supervisor, Jan, who had such a profound impact on you. And to be clear, you're not a clinician. I'll out you, but you went to Stanford GSB, Graduate School of Business, which is like the premier business school in the country. I refer to you all and your ilk as the Stanford Mafia. But she was a nurse who then went back and got her MBA. And many of our listeners are BCBAs thinking about starting their own practice and thinking maybe even about getting a master's in OBM or an MBA. How important do you think the MBA was to Jan's ability to lead and be a great supervisor?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Jan was a really special person, to me, and just in terms of her heart, and she didn't need an MBA in order to be Jan and to do what she did. For her, she was a lifelong learner, and when I had the privilege of getting to work with her, she was nearing the retirement, but she was always constantly wanting to improve. And I see that and I hear that with a lot of the BCBAs that we get to talk to who have an itch to scratch of starting their own agency, and often the business questions come up about well, I don't know about finance, I don't know how to start a business, and it's all about I think what the most important thing is the intentionality of knowing why you're there and what you're looking to get out of your learning experience. And so I think MBA programs, whether they're part-time or like accelerated executive programs, offer a tremendous opportunity to learn new skills that can be used to run a business. And I think what's really neat is when somebody does those programs and has a particular goal in mind, then the context is is super relevant every single day. Instead of just doing book learning, you're thinking, oh, how can I, what's my budget going to look like for my center? How am I going to design the culture, not just for a random case study, but for my team that I'm going to employ, and that's really cool. So I highly encourage it, but it's not the only path. I think another really successful strategy is knowing what you're good at and doubling down on that, and then partnering with somebody who can provide those skills that you might not have, because learning those business skills isn't for everybody. And I very much believe in the soar with your strengths idea and philosophy. And so rather than trying to learn something that's going to be, as I like to say, holding your nose while you do it, find somebody that you trust, that matches your values, that has high integrity, because you're going to because together it'll, in the best scenario, it's a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing, which I like to say. And a lot how our partnership has been, where we have overlap, so we have a lot of things in common, and we get each other. But then we also have enough complementary skills where together we can do a lot together.
So this is a really, really important point. And by the way, I love the idea of like the whole is, greater than the sum of the parts. I mean, you and I have literally been attached at the hip for what, 4.5 years now? I mean, some weeks, honestly, I spend more time with you, Will, than I do with my wife, my kids. And we're in this unique co-CEO model that works really well for us at Ascend and at Element, but it's not for everyone, right? And so I think, what advice would you have for someone who's considering maybe bringing on a partner, and considering a co-CEO or co-director role?
I'd say first, understand the reasons why. It's good to have that, whether it was a co-CEO arrangement or even just a traditional arrangement, not taking anything for granted. And I think just starting from scratch and having frank conversations about roles and preferences, I think is a really good first step. And just like couples, no two situations are alike. So you need to have IOA first on all the important details. And in the counseling world, there's this idea of that's based on empathy, of understanding the inner workings of your partner, and it's a way of understanding how they interpret information and how they perceive the world and make decisions. And I think those are the most important conversations to dig into. And then the role titles and the structure, I think that follows. For us, we were peers working together before we started Ascend, and we were looking to we were questioning everything at the beginning, not taking anything for granted, wanting to be innovative. And what did we see when we looked at co-CEO models out there? We saw some really tremendous partnerships, some organizations that we were really impressed with, that embodied culture and mission and values. And it was they had leaders who could do what they did best and focus on that in the organization. And I think in many ways that encouraged a lot of collaboration elsewhere in the organization. And so that worked for us, and I've been really pleased with it. I hope you've been pleased with it. If I'm open to feedback if you feel otherwise.
We're 4.5 years in, and it's been extraordinary. And one of the things I've really appreciated about you, and I think this is critical for anyone considering a partnership, is in addition to really having those frank conversations up front and trying to understand one another, this is a continuous effort of getting to know one another and how you can best work together. And so, I know last year we both did the predictive index, and that's something we rolled out across Ascend to, better pinpoint the behaviors and of different roles of the organization, including the co-CEO role. And then, we've had a longtime business advisor, an extraordinary individual, Ward Hendon, who's helped to be not a counselor or coach in the traditional sense of the word. He's just a wise dude, but he's helped facilitate conversations. And then most recently, we've really dived deep into the DISC, the DISC profiles. And something I took away from that was, hey, you got to let Will be Will, or let Jonathan be Jonathan. And so now we'll be in a meeting and we'll say something like that, and we can chuckle and have a kick out of it, but it's so true. So I don't know, that idea of continuous learning and improvement has to be core to the partnership. A partnership is not a static place, just like an organization is not a static place.
Absolutely. One thing I appreciate about you is I can tell after we've done activities with the predictive index or with the DISC, I've noticed changes in how you'll interact with me, and I've tried to recognize it in the spirit of good feedback and reinforcement. So I just want to reiterate my thank you to you for that. But I remember the other day something came up, and maybe in the past it would have been something that we wouldn't have surfaced, but and I can't even remember what it was. It was something around communication, and remember. Between us, it was comfortable to say, hey, you know what? When you do that thing, it kind of like irritates me, but you know what? That's you. Like, you do you, and I value that we are not the same and that we do things differently, and I'm willing to accept that more than my feeling of like, I wouldn't do it that way if it were me. And that's what I think makes for good partnership and just good teams, but it's hard. I'd say that it worked once we gave it the time and space and attention that that it needed. And I know both of us, tend to be fast-paced and impatient, but when we gave it the time and space it needed, it really was magic.
I remember that exactly. It was, when you've got an email to a group and there are a few people responding to it, I will almost always, before I respond, I will change the subject line so that it actually like calls out a topic or like a point I want to make in it. Which is, I don't know, I have no idea where I got that advice many years ago, but I've done it. But I appreciate how that all of a sudden takes the total thread out, and you can't follow it. Someone did, so we're going to probably have some more counseling around that. I want to come back to DaVita for a moment. Yeah, thank you, Will. Thank you. Also important to a good partnership. Coming back to DaVita, value-based care is growing to be a hot topic in the ABA field, and in fact, I'll go so far as to say in a very unscientific survey. Actually, there was zero science involved, but I would say 4.5 years ago, when we started Ascend, maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 people I'd speak with in the field were aware of value-based care, and now I'd say it's at least 6 or 7 out of 10 at least have some type of understanding. So this is a hot topic, and I want to ask, at DaVita, what did you learn about the transition to value-based care, and particularly the challenges?
Sure. I love this topic, so I'm going to do my best to keep my answer short, and if you want to ask me follow-up questions, by all means. So I think one of the most important things, and you've heard me say this before, is value-based care takes a different mindset than fee-for-service. And that's at every level of an organization. That's for providers that are used to doing things in a certain way, usually siloed, because that's what their training was, and that's the environment they've always operated in. And for organizations that are used to doing things certain ways, with budgeting, with their metrics, with what they define as success, and then also with the incentive structures. What are people naturally incentivized to do? And if you are an organization that has fee for service down to a science, like literally down to a penny, budgeting, supplies, and labor, it's going to be really hard to transition to value-based care, because value-based care, it's like oil and water with the fee-for-service structure. it really necessitates a completely different way that patients are managed clinically, of how providers interact with each other, of how outcomes are measured, and the financial metrics that are tracked. And what's fascinating to me is it's actually it's almost like speaking a different like dialect, where I could be speaking English and I could be speaking, to an English speaker from, say a country in the UK with a really strong, dialect, and I might not understand a word they're saying until I've had enough time to bridge the gaps, and then I can start to understand and make connections. So, the good news is this is the seeds for success for value-based care, I think, are often already there in provider organizations. So what are providers hungry for? They're hungry for collaboration with other providers. I have yet to meet a provider that believes they can do everything that a family needs. But if offered the chance to collaborate with a mental health provider who can help a family where they can't, they eat that up. Now, what they want is they want to make sure that if they do that, they can do it in a way that's sustainable. That's not going to result in a ding on their productivity, for example. Or they're going to want to make sure that they can do it without having to, burn the midnight oil and do it off hours, which is the only time that they can do it. But what's possible is with this more integrated, better care models, outcomes can improve, and usually costs, overall costs can go down, and everybody wins. But it's a really hard transition if it's not baked into your DNA.
So it's not just, and I should clarify for the audience, value-based care means paying for outcomes as opposed to paying for each hour of service that's provided. And so what I'm hearing you describe is like, hey, this is not just about identifying the right outcomes, which is a hard exercise in and of itself. It's not just about having the data. It's not just about having the right relationships with payers. There's an entire organizational mindset shift and almost like operating system that comes with that. Is that fair?
Yeah, it totally takes a different mindset shift. And without the whole organization embracing it, and without support, from leadership and the right education and training, it's like any other change initiative. It's unlikely to give you what you want. And the risk, and I think healthcare providers have a responsibility here. The risk in, especially leaders, the risk in this not getting done well is value-based care getting a bad rap. So there have been lots of examples where value-based care was attempted, and with mixed outcomes, mixed conclusions, and in looking carefully at those postmortems and seeing what can be gleaned from reflecting on the organization's experience, often the gaps are where the organization was still tied to a fee-for-service mentality. And but the truth of it is there's lots of room for improvement for care. We should be looking at outcomes. We should be looking at graduation rates. If a kid enters the autism treatment world ready and needing care, ready for and needing care, how effective are we at helping them reach their highest potential endpoints and getting them ready for the next phase in their life, whether that's the school system or a less restrictive environment. I mean, that's the ultimate litmus test of the effectiveness of our field. And And I think that's the responsibility we have, and what we promise, parents and families when they come to us for care. It's, you needed help, and we are here, and by being with us, you're going to, be better off the best way, the most you could have been, from this. But that's but that's really hard, and that's really different than being process oriented. And because you can do a lot of the right move, you can go through the right motions and still not get the best possible outcomes. And that's where value-based care offers some really terrific potential. Is it creates an environment where either the integration of providers or the extra resources can be brought to bear, and close those gaps to have more optimal outcomes.
ABA practice owners, are billing and insurance issues getting you down? Well, let me tell you, Element RCM is your answer. Element provides world-class revenue cycle management services, contracting, credentialing, authorizations, billing, and more. Element's your partner, so you can focus on what you love to do, providing the highest quality services to your families and clients. Element's a preferred partner of the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, and its founders have nearly 20 years of experience owning and operating successful ABA organizations. They understand you. They know that every dollar counts, that integrity is everything. Element works with any practice management system, and Element's not a vendor, they're your partner. So find out more and take a free revenue cycle assessment at elementrcm.ai. So powerfully said. Yeah, those are extraordinary insights. And I think it's also important that we realize value-based care is not like, oh, it's one thing or one model. There is actually, CMS has, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, in DC, has a very specific sort of ordered progression of increasing sort of reporting on outcomes and providers being increasingly at risk.
That's right.
For outcomes. That is even getting paid a little bit more, if they achieve, or getting paid, getting money taken away if they don't achieve certain outcomes. So there's that these graded series of levels, which what I think is critical is value-based care is not like the end point, it's a starting point that like anything else in life relies on continuous improvement to ensure you're most effectively serving your clients.
Absolutely. And just to add one more point, to build off of that concept of the different stages of value-based care, if an organization was wondering how do I get started, in this, what can I do today? Just measure the measure discharges. Measure how many discharges were the successes, meeting the predefined endpoints, a smooth transition to the next phase of care. I think what providers might find is some surprise around how low that number is. But I'm eternally an optimist, and so knowing is the best place you can be at. And so once you know where you're starting from, then you can start to look at, well, what are the reasons that we didn't achieve that? Was it a premature discharge because of the treatment environment was too challenging, or there were conflicting priorities for the family's time? Every one of those is an opportunity for designing a better process, or for an intervention, or for upskilling, a treatment team, and that's all part of the journey of continuous improvement.
I love it. And part of our play core values, that last one, why, is the 1% better every day at Ascend. I know we're both firm believers in that. Well, speaking of process, something that that you have helped to spearhead at Ascend and Element is this idea of a business operating system. And there's a lot of business operating systems out there, from System and Soul to EOS to, you name it. And I think, as we many times do, we look at all of that and we try to glean from the best, and we made up our own. Or I should say, you really had the vision for this. can you share a little bit about like what you learned, or maybe what a business operating
Sure.
system is for ABA practice owners out there, and then sort of what you've learned in implementing it and what they should consider when implementing it?
Sure, yeah. So, a business operating system is a set of instructions for how a group of integrated systems work together. So it's the at a high level, it ties together the systems and processes and people in an organization, all around achieving a certain objective. Now, just to bring that down for a moment, it includes things like weekly rhythms, or actually stepping back even further, the heartbeat, of an organization. So what's the pulse? What's the pulse look like at the executive team level? Whether that's a weekly meeting, a biweekly meeting, a monthly, ops review, then and that applies to every team. How frequently do we meet, and when we do meet, what's the agenda that we cover, and what's the data that we review? It includes things like structure. I mean, what's the org structure, and how do we make sure the org structure is designed to help us achieve our objectives? It touches on scoreboards and metrics. What are the metrics that we want to be looking at? Often, like where a business operating system can be useful is there's no shortage of ideas, and there's no shortage of people ready to roll up their sleeves and lean in and help. What it helps to do is it helps align everybody so that the wasted time and effort is minimized, and there is the most amount of predictability and routine. And I'd say that what's been what can be really hard is the discipline in sticking with a business operating system. The concepts are simple. It's really the discipline that's the hardest part. And I don't know about you. I think you're better than me at this, but for me, it's like exercising. I love exercising. I love working out and staying fit, but doing that 3 days per week, like per my plan, that's a little harder. And that's where that's where I fall short, more often than I care to admit. And so, if I were to give somebody advice on what to do with a business operating system, I'd say, it's actually less about picking the right one. It's more about making sure that you stick with it with fidelity. And the good news is that, with the, in our field, working with BCBAs and others who really love organizational development and OB, it's a natural fit. And I see it as a common ground where, clinical and business can meet and see eye to eye around what to do every day. So.
Great point. OBM is like that bridge between the clinical maybe and the business side. I like that. Well, I think there's also an important concept of like shared language, right? That it gives us, and that's
right.
freedom, right? A lot of times, I always say this from Brene Brown: "Is clarity is kind." So there's a freedom to that. But you have this great analogy. Actually, I don't know if it's great or not. I mean, it is a great analogy, but like it always like pulls this mental picture to mind of it's just good hygiene. You got to have good, it's like going to the dentist and brushing your teeth. It's like you just need the good hygiene. And, sometimes that's not really the sexiest of things. I don't know, at Element, like every time before billing goes out, you have a pre-billing like audit and review, and boom, it goes. But it's the discipline.
Absolutely.
Of continuing to do
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, you said it. You said it at Element. We say, make your bed, brush your teeth. And where that's so mundane, and it's easy to just not do it just because it's easy to not do. But where it's valuable is when the going gets tough, when things get stressful. And when things get stressful, having routine, having familiarity to fall back on can be extremely valuable, because when things get busy, our line of sight gets shorter and shorter. And before you know it, you can be in this paradigm of being behind from the moment you wake up in the morning. And that's a really stressful place to be in. I've been there before, and it happens when there ends up being so much to attend to that you get overwhelmed, and you stop being able to plan and think ahead, and then your time isn't yours anymore; it's hijacked, and that can really lead to a downward spiral, and work that previously was really reinforcing can become punishing, and so yeah, I think I really like your comment about it's good hygiene, and it's that's so true, and I would say I'm probably 2/3 a good teacher on the topic, and probably like 1/3 of the way I want to be as a practitioner. But it's we're on the journey, and we'll get there.
Dude, you're not perfect, but you're not done. To channel Ken Theory from DaVita. Let's chat about I think one of the things I really appreciate about you is you are just a lifelong learner, and you're constantly reading books, and even like delivering books to my door. It's like, Jonathan, you got to read this. So what are like 3 of the best books or most like important books you feel like you've read that you want to share?
Oh,
anything.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, I appreciate that we love sharing ideas and learning, and I do have a very tall stack of books from your recommendations. So thank you. Gosh, I have some fun ones and some work ones. One that I call fun would be 11 Rings by Phil Jackson. So I love the competitive aspect of sports. I love a good game, but I'm like woefully behind on being up on players and teams. But recently, I decided to coach my son's basketball team, and I thought, well, what better way to learn than to read a book by one of the best coaches. So I'm not sure how relevant it was to 8-year-olds, but the takeaway I got from it was, what are you willing to do to achieve your dreams? And it was basically a story about what players and coaches and people involved with the sport, what they were willing to do to achieve their dreams. And I think remarkable outcomes happen in remarkable circumstances, and it's the amount of practice you're willing to do. It's most definitely skill, but it's taking skill that's already there and then making it from good to great. And so that's one book. Let's see here. Another book is The Experience Economy. So we've been reading that together. It's by Joe Pine and James Gilmore, and The Experience Economy. It's about your customer's time is the most valuable thing. So how do you design an experience that gets them what they want and keeps them coming back for more? And I love how they distill it to a science. And I love it because the most important thing for us, as you know, and as we talk about at Ascend and Element, is relationships, and how to create an organization that is nurturing relationships with your clients, with your stakeholders in your community, the best way possible. It can be designed and taught and done well, and so that's why I love that book. The last one is I'd say there's one that goes back a little ways now to last summer, called Uniquely Human, and it was recommended to me by Elizabeth Nalenweg, our VP of Care Integration, actually. She's an LCSW, and I asked her for advice on a favorite recent book, and it's fascinating. So for someone on the spectrum, the author is Barry Prezant, Dr. Barry Prezant. He has this notion that autistic behaviors are part of a range of strategies to cope with a world that feels chaotic and overwhelming for someone on the spectrum. And when you put yourselves in the shoes of someone on the spectrum, and you see it through that lens, their behavior makes sense. And so for those around them, how can you be aware of that, and how can you be sensitive to it, and how can you adapt, and how can you help them be successful? A lot of it was geared toward adults, but I think it's absolutely applicable to kids as well. And the one word that captures it is empathy. What does a world look like through somebody else's eyes? And that was just completely eye-opening for me, and it's written really well, and I really recommend it for anybody who wants to understand, gain a deeper understanding of autism.
Powerful, man. Those are fantastic books. I have not read 11 Rings. I'm gonna have to do it, and I have not read that last book that Elizabeth recommended. I'm on it.
I'll send it to you.
One thing every I'll add it to my stack. I've got one about 2 feet high right now. But Will, what's one thing every ABA business owner should start doing, and one thing they should stop doing?
Well, it's obviously hard to speculate, where all everyone is at. But one thing you can't go wrong with in starting is talking to your teams, especially your frontline teams. That's where I think you have the chance to get some of the best learning on how things are going and what do people need. In terms of stop doing, I'd say, and stopping doing something is, I always think about the replacement behavior. So, here's a good one. It's wishful thinking. I think back to somebody once said, hope is not a strategy. And, if you're in a tough spot with your business, whether it's a personnel issue, a quality issue, a financial issue, things don't get better on their own. And being presented with data that things aren't good, but expecting that they're going to be better next time is really not a good strategy, because the likelihood that will happen is actually not very high. And I've seen a lot of heartache come from that. And it's really, what's an alternative? It's grabbing the situation by the horns, as I like to say. Giving it our full attention and just accepting where things are, and it's starting with acceptance that then you can begin to contemplate action and new thinking, maybe. And that's hard, because it's when we're stressed that we feel most vulnerable, and when we're feeling most vulnerable is when we're often least likely to want to, think outside the box. We tend to close up, but stopping wishful thinking is really what has to happen before you can start accepting and moving forward with new ideas to actually have change. I mean, there are a lot of parallels to life, so those would be my starts and stops.
Right. That wishful thinking, or this idea of optimism bias, is something I absolutely struggle with. Danny Kahneman, in fact, the Nobel Prize winner who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, described this heuristic where we overestimate our ability to shape the future, particularly in the short run.
Yeah.
And it's something I found, and I think as most entrepreneurs, right, who have this vision of creating an organization and fulfilling this need, you have to be this undying optimist. And you have to measure that with the reality of, look, hope is not a strategy. I love how you described it. Start with self-awareness, and that allows you to then tackle the things that you can tackle.
Well said. Well said.
All right, so Will, throw one question at me. Make me answer on the spot.
All right, let's see here. If you could meet any world leader today, who would it be?
Does it have to be a world leader?
Very, very broadly speaking. So somebody recognizable.
Okay. All right. Jackie Robinson.
Oh,
And here's why. I think Jackie is like one of the greatest, not just baseball players, but human beings of all time. I think in what he did to integrate Major League Baseball and to like be the first, we have no concept of what struggle is. And especially, let's be clear, as like a white man, I have no concept of that. And we have no concept of what he went through and what he had to endure. And by the way, not just endure, but like to not like hit back, to not push back, to not shout back requires a level of sort of, I don't know, being able to rise above it all, a clarity and confidence in who you are and letting things like, I don't know. And I want to understand, like, if we could each develop that kind of resilience that Jackie so brilliantly led the way on, it just feels like maybe our world would be a little bit of a better place.
that's
My
awesome.
answer.
That's awesome. Nice work. Thank you.
All right, Will. Yeah, a great question. So where can people find you online, Will?
Um, the best is LinkedIn or email. I'm sure you can include in the show notes my email, and that's I love to hear from people, and so yeah, they're welcome to reach out anytime.
Awesome. I know Will's virtual door is always open. That's will@ascendbehavior.com, and we'll put that in the show notes. All right, Will, are you ready for our hot take rapid fire questions?
I'm ready.
Here goes. You're on your deathbed. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for?
Oh, the one thing I'd want to be remembered for, that I helped make parenting a little easier.
What's your most important self-care practice?
I wish I could say it was exercising regularly, but it's not. I'd say it's noticing the small things, whether it's taking a walk and being present of the scenery, or being with my kids and trying to savor, their little hands or their smile. That's what I try to do every chance I get and remember.
Intention and attention. Wasn't it Georgia O'Keeffe who, instead of taking those, she's a photographer, and instead of taking the huge, sweeping, beautiful, majestic scenery, she would pick like a small petal on a flower and then zoom right in, and then and blow that up. And that was her thing. I don't know, as you described that, Georgia O'Keeffe came to mind.
Nice.
What's your favorite song ever?
Oh my gosh. I have a terrible answer for this one, because I will obsess on a song until I'm sick of listening to it and move on. I'm learning piano, and right now I'm working on mastering the Star Wars theme. So that's top of mind. I can't get that out of my head now, but I'm getting there.
Dun, 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 dun.
I love taking popular songs and learning the piano versions, and but it is if I could channel the piano playing in my head to my actual fingers, that would be amazing. Drake has some pretty awesome piano versions of his music, so that's something that probably is a little more popular these days.
Dude, I've just learned many more new things about you. All right, if there's one place in the world you think should be on everyone's bucket list, what is it?
One place. Well, the pastry shop that was the best in the country, if not the world. Well, okay, we're not going to go there. That's blasphemous for France. Was in Denver, but it closed, so it's no longer an option. A good second option is, oh my gosh, going to see giant sequoias. I went to Calaveras Big Trees in California, and there's various places in California. I've only been to one where you can see giant sequoias, but talk about seeing something that's worth fighting for to preserve, and that it creates a sense of awe and smallness in the universe. That was a special experience. So I would say anywhere you can go see giant sequoias.
Oh man. All right. Now you can only wear one style of footwear for the rest of your life. What would it be?
Oh, well, that's an easy one. I love sneakers because you're always ready to move in sneakers. So I like to be prepared.
I could testify to that. And if you see Will at a conference or a big important meeting, he will have his sweatpants and his like sweat over jacket on, and he'll have a comfy pair of sneakers. So always the utilitarian. Hey, brother, this was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, Jonathan, this was super fun. Thanks for having me. Nice work and high five.
Hey, high five to you. Thanks for being my.
Thanks for listening to Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast. Stay tuned for our next exciting episode. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. We value your feedback. Don't forget to follow us on social media at elementrcm.ai.